A cute little crocodile with big bulging eyes and a bunch of fluffy friends in a 3D mascot platformer from the 32-bit era? We definitely didn't get enough of these, did we? But in the midst of mediocrity, one of these did in fact make an attempt at standing out, and judging by the sales figures it succeeded. This is Croc, Legend of the Gobbos, and over 3 million people bought it on PlayStation alone, so it must have had an impact on someone. But is it any good? Well, it starts with the most adorable cutscene you've ever seen in your entire life, of a pair of cutesy eyeballs washing up on the shore in a little brown fluffy thing that looks like a Star Trek tribble, known as a Gobbo. Then we get an adorable montage of growing up and oh look, we've got a mascot. Job done. The story's something to do with a huge, hulking evil person named Baron Dante, who I assume lives nearby and has one day decided that all of these little fuzzy bastards need to be stopped for some reason. I don't know, who cares? Nobody pays attention to the plot of these things. Then it's just an excuse to go stomping around in 3D, jumping on stuff and smacking it in the face. And so begins your quest as Croc to go jumping on things and smacking them in the face. Out of interest, I have to wonder, do crocodiles generally exist in the world of the Gobbos? You know, in their natural day-to-day life? The reason I ask is that obviously Croc's name is Croc, which comes from the fact that he's a crocodile. But if they didn't know what a crocodile was, and he arrived as a baby who presumably couldn't talk, how would they know to call him Croc otherwise? Or is it just a happy coincidence and you know what, I don't actually care. I'm starting to relate to Baron Dante and wish that all the stupid fluffy faces would vanish. Anyway, now actually does begin your quest, and it's one that involves 3D platforming on platforms that were very much not built for 3D platforming. You might not know this, but Croc released on both the original PlayStation and the Sega Saturn, neither of which at the time had an analog stick. Which means we're doing 3D platforming with a D-pad and oh, I think you know where this is going. Random fact for you, by the way, Croc was originally pitched to Nintendo as a Yoshi game for the Nintendo 64. So it could have had an analog stick from day one, and then released a year after Super Mario 64 to thunderous applause and a control scheme that made sense. But that's an alternate universe where nice things happen and we don't live there, do we? Instead we get shoulder buttons and sidestepping and a dedicated button to just turning around. If it's starting to sound incredibly clunky and hard to manage, well, it is. But not for the reasons you think it is. Surprisingly, the controls in the original Croc work incredibly well. Yes, you have to line up your jumps and movement in general, and no, you can't run around in a big smooth curving arc very often without bumping into something. But for the most part, you have complete control over the wide-eyed little reptile and he will go exactly where you want him to go once you figure out how. It takes some getting used to because tank controls in a 3D platformer is a horrible idea that we should never have been subjected to, and thank God for the invention of the analog stick. But it's very much a case of making the best of a bad situation, and honestly it could have been a lot worse. It could have been Bubsy 3D. No, where you start bumping into clunky janky wanky clunk is with the ultimate downfall of most 3D games of the era, the camera. Developer Argonaut tried their damnedest with this as well, giving you shoulder button control over the height of the perspective, and including free look that has the added bonus of most of the time resetting the viewpoint behind you. They took the ceiling away from most of the levels, so there's even less for it to get caught on, and many spaces are a decent enough width that there aren't many walls for it to get embedded in, as so many cameras of the time had a tendency to do. But it's still, sadly, not enough. The camera will, on occasion, wildly swing around as if it's trying to make you throw up your lunch, and if you utilise the built-in 180-degree turn, sometimes it'll just lose all semblance of competence and launch itself somewhere over there in the distance. There's also an issue with depth perception, which is partially due to the limitations of the lighting system of the 32-bit era. There's a little shadow under Croc's bum that you can use to position your leaps in mid-air, as is also the case with stuff like Crash Bandicoot, but it doesn't appear until you're right over a floor, and by then it's too late. So you'll fall to your death with just enough time to realise how far off you actually were, almost like the game is making fun of you. Croc also doesn't like slopes, so I don't know why they included slopes. What the game classes as a slope is maddening because sometimes it's the sides of a platform you're meant to stand right in the middle of, and you'll think you've made a jump only to slip annoyingly off into the cold dark abyss. Still, it's serviceable and it's something that, like I said, you can eventually adjust to. It's not ideal, but nothing in 3D without an analog stick actually is, and we're just making the most of what we have. And what we have, to be honest, is one of the most charming and heartfelt games ever made. It's lovely, really. Sickeningly so. Like slathering buttercream on a big sugary cake and then feeding it to a puppy, and then the puppy gets a little bit of cream stuck on its nose and goes all cross-eyed trying to wipe it off, while you're filming it with tears streaming down your face because it's just so cute. It's that, but in a video game. There's nothing groundbreaking going on, it's all your standard set of levels with forest, ice, desert, lava, etc. But it's a good example of what it's trying to do, and in 1997 there weren't many better attempts anyway, other than the looming shadow of the great and unstoppable Super Mario 64 that came out the year previous, and made everything else look like amateur hour at a Unity game dev summer camp for toddlers. Croc has a suitable and predictable moveset with an attack, a butt stomp, climbing, swinging and swimming, and the level designs are mostly built around capitalising on these. There's the bafflingly stupid decision to make the second world the icy one, which means you spend the opening levels getting used to the physics and momentum of the little green bastard before it's all ripped away from you, and you're skidding to your death. But other than some questionable decisions and the occasional bad platform placement in a world shown through a shonky 3D camera that hates you, it's actually alright. In fact, it's pretty good. There's a lot to be doing, from rescuing your little furry adopted family from cages and suspended platforms over tantalisingly close lava pits, to picking up optional hidden gems to unlock secret exits that reward you with more lives and whatnot in that traditional 3D collectathon tradition. Camera issues aside, the challenge level is pretty solid and you should find yourself having a reasonable amount of progression, barring a couple of tedious backtracking levels that occasionally throw off the difficulty curve. But a real highlight for me is the boss fights, which are by themselves very janky little set pieces that sometimes don't work very well, and they never have any complexity above do this thing 3 times. But I really enjoy them for the presentation and context. Even if it's a slightly awkward fight, you have to love squaring off against a boxing beetle that the evil Baron Dante has magically scaled up, in a way that was clearly meant to be Magikoopa in that way that Yoshi's Island created its bosses. At the end of the fight, you always get these adorable little cutscenes and show the poor hapless thing returning to its natural state before a little bird whisks Croc off in a cloud of sparkles. It's just so cute. I also have to give special mention to the soundtrack. It absolutely did not need to go this hard, but it did anyway. Some of it is really cutesy, as you'd expect, but then there's absolute bangers that rival what Nintendo were doing, and stand up proudly against anything from that era, including stuff like Banjo-Kazooie. Here's a couple of examples so you can see what I mean. Just a real absolute bop of a soundtrack that helps to contextualise and elevate the package as a whole, and adds to that whole thing about how you'll forgive its shortcomings given the time and technology they had to work with. And I think that's the crux of Croc. A bit like a puppy that you bring home, that immediately chews up your furniture and then stares at you through doughy wide eyes like it doesn't know it's just wrecked £2,000 worth of your stuff while it happily sits in a killing field of dead stuffing. There's so much that you'll forgive just because it's adorable. Now, I need to talk about something that partially sparked me to make this video at all. It was a tweet from someone I won't shame because that's mean, which claimed that Croc should be far more widely regarded as a classic, and that its lack of fame highlighted the bias that the YouTube community apparently has towards Nintendo. Let me be clear. Croc is good, but if you think that it's better than, for example, Super Mario 64, then I'm afraid you need to go and see a doctor as soon as possible because, and I'm sorry to be the one to have to tell you this, you are suffering from rocks in your brain. Just big old pebbles stuffed right up in there where your sense of logical reason should be. I wish you a speedy recovery. Trust me, I know all about negative afflictions that affect your judgment. I have this horrible chronic condition where if I see someone being wrong on the internet, I have to make a video about it just to get it off my chest. It's no way to live, but here we are. Anyway, yes, alright, Super Mario 64 shows this up, but Super Mario 64 shows up most of what came out in the 3D space on the PlayStation anyway, and we're at a point now where we can appreciate what they did right back then instead of what the faults were, and Croc did a lot right, and I think you deserve to try it out. If you do want to do that, by the way, this video has been produced using the Croc unofficial update for the PC port, which is what really prompted me to make this video, rather than the people with the rocks in the brain. Highly recommended, try it out, see what you think. So, Croc, Legend of the Gobbos. Is it any good? Yes, but with an asterisk that leads down to wouldn't be if it wasn't adorable. And if you think this video has been any good, then you should like it, and then subscribe for more videos like this one. And I'll see you the next time I need to ask, hey, is it any good?